Welcome, everyone. This month's theme is truth. Truth about our rights, our liberties, and our freedoms. Tonight, we are focusing specifically on midwifery in the private domain and the growing concern around outside control over birth, motherhood, family decisions, and sharing of information. This conversation we're going to talk about is not attacking hospitals, physicians, or licensed practitioners. It is about exploring another lawful pathway, one rooted in private association, informed consent, and voluntary contractual relationships. We are also discussing the difference between public, state-regulated practice and private ministry, or association-based care. The purpose is education, historical perspective, and understanding the importance of voluntary agreement.
Thank you, Amber. That was a great introduction. And I would like to add that as we go through this presentation, we have a special guest here whose specialty is midwifery, and who's watching what's going on in the space, and in the licensing space in particular. And so we'll invite her to riff and talk about this, but also that as we're going through this, remember, it's not just about midwifery and the topic of licensing, but all alternative care practitioners and the topic of licensing. And so we'll be bringing factors in with that, in that we've all been indoctrinated to think that we need a license when it may be the best choice for you. And it may be something that you decide, hey, when I contract with that licensing body, I'm giving away all of my rights, liberties, and freedoms for something that I'm not doing anything wrong in the first place.
The theme of truth matters deeply here because so much of modern birth culture is built upon assumptions. One major assumption is that pregnancy and birth are primarily medical conditions requiring institutional management. Another assumption is that safety can only exist through centralized oversight. Historically, however, birth is family-centered, community-supported, and guided by experienced women long before licensing boards ever existed. This discussion asks an important question. Who gets to decide what is safest and most appropriate for a mother and her child? It also requires the understanding of the distinction between force and consent, public regulation and private agreement, and between licensed activity and voluntary association.
It's really important to understand that birth is not illegal. So a woman's right to birth at home has never been removed, even though we do have states where midwifery in and of itself is illegal. All types of midwives in those states are illegal. But the families still retain the right to choose where birth occurs. So just remember, home birth, just because the midwives may all be licensed and you don't want a licensed midwife, does not mean that you cannot still choose birth at home. You can choose who is present at your birth, which is very important. It's okay to have nobody there, and it's okay to have everyone there. It's your choice who you get to have there. Private choices are different from state licensing services. And this is where we hit the little sticky wicket, if you will. When you have a private choice, that means you have access to almost all options. Where a state licensed midwife has requirements. There are things that they are required by the state to do. I know that there is one state where, even though midwives know that cervical exams are not evidence-based, it is part of their licensure. So they are required to do them, even though they know that the families they serve don't want cervical exams. They do not get to decline. And that is not okay at all. So we have to remember that birth is a natural process. It is not automatically a medical event. It is part of a woman's natural physiologic and biologic processes of her body.
So, Andy, may I ask, when you say these states where midwifery is illegal, do you mean that it's illegal unless you have a license?
No, I mean that whether you have, there is no license,
Okay.
and they do have laws that meter out the types of midwives that are illegal. So that is not to say that home birth does not happen with
Right.
a midwife. We have an underground railroad, and it's been a part of this nation for a very long time, and it has done different things. And so we do have midwives that are underground.
Mm-hmm. So in these states, in this case, do you see the private ministry? I'm going to say ministry, and specifically in
Mm-hmm.
this case, this is
Mm-hmm.
what when I work with midwives, I don't tell people what to do, but I just encourage them very strongly that since birth is one of the original ministries, that
Mm-hmm.
that I highly suggest that they do the ministry route and not just a standard private association.
I do the same.
Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
do you see private ministerial associations unincorporation as an answer to protecting midwives in these states where it's illegal?
Absolutely. Because the
Okay.
thing that, without having actually looked at their law, their legislature, um, I can almost say with certainty that the law defines a midwife according to the state. But the midwives are not currently aware that they can define the midwife too. She just needs to look differently than what the state says a midwife is.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, that's like these states that want to think they own the word chiropractor.
Yes. Yes.
Fine, then I won't
Mm-hmm.
use the word chiropractor all, but you can say your certification after your name. So fine, I'll do that. But it's
Yeah.
so cuckoo. It's like, no, you don't get to own these
Yes.
words. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've been encouraging midwives they've been walking away from the word. I'm just like, no, it belongs to women. Don't let the state take it. Just because they
Right.
defined it doesn't mean that you can't define it.
Right. Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for answering that.
Welcome.
Yeah, I think that's very important. As we look at this conversation again, back to licensing now makes things illegal that were never illegal to begin with.
Right.
Right? Adjusting the spine was never illegal
Right.
till a licensing board came along.
Mhm.
And I do have an area of understanding with this, because we don't just want people taking a 2-day seminar and then hanging out their shingle.
Exactly. That's right.
So I do understand where it came from, but of
Mm-hmm.
course, when overregulation and intrusion comes on the scene, then it takes something that was meant for good and just makes it into a great big money laundering scheme.
Exactly. Exactly. And here in midwifery land, we do have a new term, birth keeper. When midwives started looking for, well, what do I call myself now? In came the birth keeper, but now we have some organizations that are certifying birth keepers without any emergency type skills.
Mhm.
And that is very concerning to me.
Right.
I've spoken with many of them who wanted who are wanting to do ministries, and I welcome them in, and I also encourage them, learn what you need to learn, because you don't ever know when something is going to happen that you had not anticipated. So it's just really important to remember we are dealing with human beings, and it's important for you to know that you know what you're doing, because packing up your things and leaving after telling them to just call 911 is abandonment, and that is not good on the woman's psyche. That is not leaving her in a healthy situation at all. And so, like you said, I don't want somebody to just take, a 6-week course and say, oh, I can be at birth.
Right.
There's a lot more to it.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure that we understand what it means to be a midwife. Because as someone who has been at birth where things happened very quickly that I was not anticipating, I was very grateful that I had not only read the books, but that I had, done the exercises, even though I had not ever needed the information yet. I still had gone in and had done refresher courses and had kept that information fresh in my mind, especially when I was getting ready to go to a birth after one. And so when I needed it most, it was there and easily accessible, and saved the day, you know.
Yeah.
So it doesn't always, but in my situation, it did. And
Right.
I was very grateful that I did that. But, right now unfortunately, we do have some people, and it's not every birth keeper. I want people to understand that. There are certification programs where the birth keepers are being very, very well educated. But you just don't know which one you're getting. That's the problem.
Right.
So, that's why I want people to maintain that word. Midwife belongs to women.
Right.
It doesn't belong to the government.
Right. Yeah, I like that. I think part of the answer to that conundrum is so I'll just use myself as an example again. I went through the 4-year training. I have the diploma on the wall. But then at that point, so for whatever, whether it's for midwifery or chiropractic or naturopathic medicine or functional medicine, whatever, you take the entire training, but then you don't have to go get that license from the state that says, oh, now we give you permission to do your ministerial work in the world. Yeah. And I know that there's nuances to things, but to me, that seems to be the answer to part of the issue is get the training and get the good training.
Yeah.
Get the legit training. But then you don't have to go get the licensing board, which is front by the state.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, Amber, you want to move us along?
Let's go.
Oh, look, we just talked about that and didn't even know it.
Oh, wonderful. Let's get the overview. Licensing is commonly presented as protection, but it also creates dependency on state permission. When someone accepts a professional license, they generally agree to comply with regulatory requirements established by the licensing authority. So thank you for the license. I'll do everything you ask. In many states, midwifery standards are heavily influenced by medical boards, hospital systems, or institutional models of care that assume hospital birth is the safest and preferred standard. That does not mean all licensed midwives are unsafe or compromised. Many, and I would say most, licensed midwives deeply care for mothers and families. That's why they do it. However, the framework itself often limits autonomy, informed choice, and individualized care. This is why some practitioners eventually decide they no longer want their work governed primarily by institutions that fundamentally view birth as a medicalized lens. View birth through a medicalized lens. We want our freedom back. So Angie here is sharing us how to do that. Let's talk about the difference between a public practice versus a private agreement, a private contractual agreement with the families. This is one of the most important distinctions in this conversation we're having tonight. Public commerce and private association are not the same thing. A licensed public practice operates under state regulatory authority because the practitioner entered into that framework. A private association or unincorporated ministry association operates differently. Participation is voluntary, relationships are private, and the structure is based on mutual agreement between consenting adults, and hence our private contracts. We're working through private contracts. Many private associations believe that members have the right to make decisions regarding education, wellness, childbirth, support, and ministry care without unnecessary outside interference. Private structures still require wisdom, integrity, documentation, informed consent, and lawful conduct. And that's how we keep ourselves safe and secure and build trust with our members.
That was very nicely presented and makes complete sense, and also honors that it's a choice. And neither the public licensing people, you do what you want to do, and we can do what we want to do, because again, they do legal, we do lawful, and they're both valid.
Private contracts are one of the foundations in our private associations. And these private contractual relationships are foundational in many areas of life. In the private domain, participants voluntarily agree to the nature of the relationship, the services being offered, the limitations of those services, and their own responsibilities. That's why it's important to take our time when we're signing these contracts and ask questions. For families seeking private midwifery support within an association or ministry setting, informed consent becomes extremely important. Families should clearly understand what type of support is being offered, whether the practitioner is licensed or unlicensed, the philosophy of care, emergency planning, the private nature of the agreement. All of this clarity protects everyone involved. And it also opens the lines of communication to ask questions that might be hard to ask. Historically, women support other women through childbirth. Midwives were respected members of the communities long before the modern licensing systems emerged. During the 20th century, birth increasingly shifted into hospitals and under institutional medical control. At the same time, many traditional midwives were marginalized, restricted, or pushed out unless they complied with state systems. Understandingly, this history helps explain why some practitioners today feel called to return to community-based models centered on trust, relationship, continuity of care, and family sovereignty.
Angie, do you have anything to add on the historical perspective?
You know, I've been saying a lot over the last couple of weeks with everything that's been going on, that we have to remember the biblical midwives. So we know their names. We only know Pharaoh as Pharaoh. We don't know which Pharaoh it was, who ordered them to kill children, and they said no, and they didn't die. So that tells us how important they were in that community. But there's another part in the scriptures. It's just like maybe in one or two verses, but there was a battle going on, and the midwives needed to get to a birth, and they stopped the battle and they cleared the battlefield so the midwives could cross. That's how important midwives were. And we need to get back to that. We need to understand what our roots are. and that they go way back there. We also need to understand a statistic that I learned last year is that, did you know that 97% of human history is not recorded? I
Wow.
was stunned when I heard that statistic. I was like, wow, 97% of human history has not been written down. It's unrecorded. We don't
Wow.
know what happened. And so here we are, we're talking about the difference between hospital birth or medicalized birth and physiologic birth. And guess which one has been around longer? Physiologic birth, birth at home. Um, the medicalized birth took hold. It shifted birth from 98% born at home to 98% born in the hospital about the mid 1960s. So I just want to let that sink in for a little bit. The 1960s. We're now in
Yeah.
1920 or 2026. So we're looking at what, 86, maybe 90 years, where most of the humans have been born in the hospital.
Mm.
And it's like, this didn't happen because women's bodies devolved, because
No.
it forgot how to do things. This happened because it was gently and intentionally pushed someplace where it could be, in my opinion, experimented on, where they could do different things, and they have. Starting with all of the women giving birth in the same room, and then we're going to split them up, a couple of women to the room, giving birth in the same space, and then it was, well, what happens when we give mom medication? What happens when we put her into twilight sleep, which was where she wasn't asleep but she wasn't awake, and she had no idea that she had given birth? What happens if we pull the child out instead of having the mom push, because that's just got to be painful? What happens if we, give her medication? What about nitric oxide? What about this? What about that? People think that the epidural is an amazing thing, but they're totally unaware that it can have up to 14, that's right, 14 painkillers in one epidural. And these days they're including fentanyl and ketamine. So we have moms who are not only experiencing medicated birth, but they're hallucinating. And for the first time in human history, we also have moms going home from their medicated birth experience as drug seekers because of the fentanyl that they experienced. And it's got to stop somewhere. So returning it to where it belongs,
Yeah.
physiologic birth, in the privacy and sanctity of the mother's home. Because we also talk about the cascade of interventions. We know exactly what's going to happen when a woman gets induced. We can follow the trail. It's very predictable. But nobody talks about the very first step of that induction, and that is telling her that she has to leave her home to give birth. The moment that she believes she has to give birth away from home, we have started that cascade of interventions.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Well, I just went through a range of emotion listening to that with the full body God bumps with the biblical references, and then some sadness with where we are, and then disbelief that I didn't realize that it was, that yet again another drug pushing event.
That was a lot. Thank you for sharing, Angie. I had no idea about a lot of those things. Many families today feel growing concern over increasingly institutional involvement in parenting, education, medical decisions, and family life. This concern is not limited to birth. Across many areas, people are noticing increasing pressure towards centralized systems, standardized protocols, and digital oversights. For some mothers and midwives, the private domain represents an attempt to preserve personal autonomy, informed consent, relational care, and freedom of conscience. Again, this conversation is not about rejecting emergency medicine or denying that complications can occur. Rather, it is about preserving the right of families to choose the framework through which they receive their support. Some midwives eventually conclude that the license system no longer aligns with their values, philosophy, or approach to birth. They may feel constrained by protocols that prioritize liability management or institutional preferences over individualized maternal care. Others feel that the licensing framework increasingly limits honest conversations, informed choice, or the ability to support families according to conscience. As a result, some practitioners transition into private contractual models, ministry associations, or education and support-based roles outside conventional state licensing structures. Each practitioner must carefully evaluate the laws in their own jurisdiction and seek competent legal guidance where appropriate.
Real quick, I think this is a great place to just highlight that the conditioning, the indoctrination that we must follow what the hospital says. We must do what the doctor says. We must do what the business license department says. We must do what the Secretary of State does, and find and unhooking from, at the very least, asking better questions. I'm like, is it true that we must do what they say? And as the three of us have found out, and all the people in our network that we've helped, must not. We don't have to do it what they say.
Right, right. But we've been conditioned from the time that we were little people to just do what the authority figure says. And so we have been led to this part of our lives. We've been led to this very moment in which here we are as grown adults going, wait a second, who's in charge of me? Am I in charge of me? Do I ever get to be in charge of me? Because if my parents were in charge of me, and now you're telling me that my boss is in charge of me, the state is in charge of me, you know, the FDA is in charge of me, whoever we want to put on there. But the bottom line is the very first item on this bullet list, autonomy. Autonomy is the right to self-govern. And I've heard some midwives say, I'm okay with giving up a little bit of my autonomy to be able to serve families the way that I want. And I've just looked at them and said, you either can self-govern or you can't. It's not really something that you can negotiate well in order to govern yourself. So we need to know how to create our own practice guidelines. We, like my list of do's and don'ts, those are my practice guidelines. I just didn't write them out in sentences. I just said, these are the things I'm not going to do, and these are the things that I will do. But we have to be able to govern ourselves. We're grown adults. And so when we learn correct principles, then it's so easy for us to govern ourselves. It's just common sense. But we are here in this time in history in which you look around and there's so much fear around stepping out of line, around not doing what you're told. And I'm just done with all of it. You know, because like 60 years ago, when people were telling you, you have to wear a mask to come in, it's just like, no, I do not. But there aren't a lot of us that are doing that. We still have people waking up. We still have people, I talk to people almost weekly who come to me to ask their questions about this option. And they're like, but wait a second, don't I have to? No, you don't. The moment I have their documents drafted, like, okay, so who do I have to send these to? I'm just like, well, if you would like to email them to yourself again, I guess you could. Because it's hard to realize that, oh, I'm the top of the food chain now. I'm the one in charge of me. And it's just a different view of the world once you realize, oh, okay. So if there's something that I want to change in the way that I'm doing things, then I just need to go to the mirror and have a conversation with myself. I don't have to write a letter or look through all of the guidelines because I already know what they are because I wrote them,
Right.
right? So
Beautiful.
I don't know.
Beautiful.
I see midwives right now headed in the wrong direction. And I feel like, when the bulls go running, they're headed one direction and I'm standing in front of them going, turn around, turn around, turn around. You know,
Yeah.
so I'm
I,
now, I'm now today just sitting here and going, all right, well, if you'd like to have a conversation and learn a little bit more about what's happening here with private associations, I would love to give you all of the information as someone who has a private ministry and can share with you how I function within it because it's quite beautiful. I feel very free. The families that I serve and I get to have some very open and honest conversations that quite honestly I don't think that I would be able to have with them if I was licensed because they would be afraid that I would turn them over to the state because there's certain things that you have to report on um, with licenses. There's certain ways that you have to do things. There's certain documentation that you have to turn in. Um, and with this, no one gets anything. It belongs to me. It's my private property, and all of the stuff just lives there in privacy. And so the families know I can share my entire history with her, and it's not going to go anywhere. But it's going to give her what she needs so that she can serve me better. That's what I want.
yes, so important.
Mhm.
Okay, Amber, move us along.
It is important to emphasize that private practice is not about avoiding responsibility. In fact, the private domain requires a very high level of integrity and transparency. Families deserve honesty, clear agreements, emergency preparedness, and realistic conversations about risk. Responsible practitioners understand their limitations, maintain appropriate records, encourage informed decision making, and prioritize maternal and infant well being. Freedom without responsibility becomes chaos, but freedom paired with wisdom, consent, and accountability can create deeply respectful and empowering care relationships.
Our mentor, David Edwards, and I say our because we are all senior advisors with PMA Power and David Edwards. He said the state, so this is very pertinent in the whole licensing conversation and what is being put forth about requiring midwives to be licensed. He says the state cannot force anyone to enter into a contract unless it is a condition of their business license. The state also cannot insert itself into private contractual matters of members within our private associations. The solution would be to not obtain a license and keep your ministry and keep your business and all the activities private. Again, we want people to take a look at this and go, what is best for me and the people that I am going to help? And my children, right? And our children and our families.
Right. I think what I love most about this bullet list is the consent-based relationships because so much of what we do these days out in the public, we're told what's going to happen to us. There's no real consent. You might get a piece of paper to read and sign that doesn't give you all the information, but it's not true consent. But when we're talking about a true um, consensual relationship, so we are having the conversations, we're hashing it out, we're making sure that we're clear on all of the points, there's nothing but safety there, right? Because you're coming into it with a clear understanding. And if there's not a clear understanding, then at least you know I can ask more questions and they're not going to bite my head off. I have lots of parents who are like, this is going to seem like a dumb question. And I'm like, it's not a dumb question. You know, it's a question that you have. And so let's get it answered. It might be a question that I've answered a million times before, but it's the first time that you're asking it. So we need to know that we can have that back and forth of question and answer session as often as we need to on as many topics as necessary, so that we feel and know that we are safe and respected, because that's really the best way for these kinds of relationships to move forward and be effective for everybody.
I agree. I'm like, please read what you've signed and please ask questions.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I'm not going to hand you something that says, I, so and so, have read and agree with this thing that I was never given.
Right.
Yeah, what we're doing in the private domain is a little different than our huge corporations that want us to not read their terms and conditions. It's highlighted blue and we have to open it in a new window and it's 30 to 100 pages long. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, side rant there. I'll bring us back in. Let's look at the next slide. So let's return to truth. Truth asks us to examine assumptions, like long contracts. Truth asks us to remember history and to protect human dignity, informed consent, voluntary relationships, and freedom of conscience. The conversation we're having is about preserving space for mothers, families, and practitioners to engage in honest, private, consensual relationships rooted in trust and responsibility. No matter where each of us stands personally on licensing or regulation, we can still agree that women deserve truthful information, meaningful choices, and respectful support during one of the most sacred experiences of life. All right. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Amber Wright.
And I'm Lane Linebaugh.
And I am Angie Taylor.
And together we are working to bring truth back to private space and to our nation.
Yeah,
Yep.
we're all PMA advisors. We can help others set up their unincorporated associations, ministries, and churches and guide them along in the process of how to operate in the private domain. Angie is a midwife, and I help run Enlighten, and Lane is a chiropractor and in the health and wellness space.
Yeah.
So we appreciate you being here. Thank you for watching.
Yep. You can reach out to any of the information above or comment wherever you find this video. Thanks for being here.